We spend about a third of our lives doing it, the thing we do with our heads, our hearts, and our hands. But what does it actually mean to do it well? To build something that matters, to create a place where people genuinely thrive. Welcome to How's Work, a conversation series exploring what it means to show up, build, and lead with purpose. I'm your host, Nathan Wadding, and in this first episode, I sit down with Patrick Colletti, advisor to CEOs and boards, professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and someone who has spent his career helping companies go from 0 to $1 billion, all while keeping the people at the center of it. Patrick has a rare gift. He can hold the P&L, the people, and the mission of the organization all in one conversation, at the same time make it feel deeply human. In our conversation, we dig into what culture actually is. Hint, it's not a foosball table. How summer camp shaped his entire philosophy around leadership, and why authentic vulnerability is the foundation of every great team. This is episode 1, and I can't think of a better place to start. Let's get to work. So, Patrick Colletti.
Nathan.
Thank you for coming to the office today to talk about our favorite subject, work.
Thanks for inviting me.
I knew that when I wanted to start this project of exploring work, I wanted your voice to really shape the beginnings of this work for us and understanding what that meant, because the impact you've had on the people that have come into your life, that have worked at a company that you've been part of, has been fantastic. And I think that's a voice needed in today's world.
That's an honor. Thank you.
I could read your bio. You already told me you do so many things that it's already outdated. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, I spend most of my time these days working with boards and CEOs who have ambitious plans for what's next, but they want it now. And a lot of times that's helping leaders on that path from 0 to $1 billion. They're somewhere along the path and they want a running partner. You know, they want somebody to come alongside them. So usually that's spending a day or two with them each month. Sometimes that's a whole flurry of events, working on an actual project. Other times it's coffee and talking and walking. And other times it's, it can be more intense. So that's kind of my day job. I teach at Carnegie Mellon, which is such a blast and has taught me a lot. And I try to spend time with entrepreneurs. So I think it's not infrequent for me to spend time over coffee, over lunch, trying to encourage and exhort leaders and entrepreneurs to kind of do the brave stuff.
Yeah, and I've been part of that nudging to do the brave stuff as well. So I appreciate that. We spend about a third of our lives working. We spend time at work, thinking about work, doing work. We like to say here, the thing we do with our head, our heart, and our hands. How do you think about work? What does work mean to you as a person?
Yeah, so I think how we spend our days, there's this old adage that, your entire life is essentially summed up in a day. And so what we do every minute, every hour, every day, it quickly becomes our life. I'm fortunate now to do a lot of work that's very meaningful and fun for me and creates good connections with people and really good outcomes for boards and leaders. And so my work is really just an expression of my strengths. I learned that a while back through the Leaders Collaborative and some work I did with the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation just around what's my giftedness? What are my strengths? And, that process taught me that I'm really not good at so many things, but I really am designed and built to be good at one or two things. And so if I can spend more time, get more reps in that zone, that becomes my work.
Yeah.
And so just spending more time on that process has become my work these days.
Yeah. There's a quote, and I always think about, whenever I hear that from you, I always think about the Viktor Frankl quote. And he says, what is the world calling or asking of me? Right? Versus what am I going to do? But what is the world calling me to do?
Yeah. I think it's great. And I think we can find answers to those questions in terms of like, what breaks your heart for the world? What situations upset you? What things in the world you think should be changed? What are broken? And how can you transform them into something better?
Yeah. What was your first job?
The Pittsburgh Press. So I was a paper boy. I literally carried a bag. I remember that. I had the daily papers and then the Sunday papers, which were really rough.
Yeah.
Going up a hill. First, you had to stuff the papers early in the morning on Sunday.
Yeah.
And then I had to throw them on my little paper rack, which I had to cart up the hill. It was tough work. And even just the frequency of doing it every day was tough.
Yeah.
But I had all kinds of odd jobs. I worked at Hofstadt's. I was a dishwasher, made salads. I was a cashier at Giant Eagle. I was a janitor in college for a little bit. So I've run the gamut.
Your early jobs, your formative years, how did that shape who you became as a leader and as an employee, as a person that goes to work every day?
Yeah, so there was a juxtaposition there where I think I kind of grew up with an early grinder's mindset of like, no, we're going to put in the hours, we're going to put in the work. I did landscaping, I did just kind of whatever. But then a visit to my uncle really changed things and kind of opened up a lens for me. So he was the CEO of a drug discovery company, and it was kind of a startup, but I don't know, maybe had 30 or 50 people or something like that. And I remember driving out to his office. He had this Alfa Romeo GTV6, and we were on this highway, and New York City was kind of in the background. And we got to the office, and it was a drug discovery place, so they had all kinds of weird centrifuges and things like that. And I remember with my cousin, we filled up some water balloons, out of the, actual those plastic gloves. And we went up to the roof and kind of threw them off the roof. We thought that was hilarious. And then he had this device where you could freeze things. And, it seemed like seconds. So we did the same thing, and we froze them. We threw a couple off the roof. It inspired me to realize, like, you can create places where you can work. And you can do silly things if you want to do silly things, or you can do serious things as well. And so at a pretty formative age, I had that experience. It opened up my eyes to the fact that, we can run companies, we can create things, we can create spaces. And I think it was really formative.
Double major for you in college, right? Philosophy and business. Did you go in knowing what you wanted to do? How did that process? Because those two things, I can see where they converge for you, right?
Yeah.
But usually don't get a lot of overlap in those two areas, right? So how did you know and discover that?
So I think there's a little thread of philosophy that runs in my family. So I would start there. I knew I wanted to study business. And as I got to school and took a couple of electives and a couple of philosophy classes and psychology classes, I started wrestling with some big questions and a little bit of existentialism. And I liked it. And I like kind of chewing on these and having debates about, well, why are we here? And what are we doing? And like, what's the point of this? And it just kind of caught. And so for me, it made sense to do a double major. And today, when I think about these things, our work is our philosophy. The way we show up at work, how we choose to create in the world, it's just our living philosophy. And so for me today, those two things are just intertwined.
So in your book, do a little book plug for you.
All right.
And you see I've got a few favorite spots in it. But in your book, you have this really lovely way of talking about culture. And it was shaped very early in your life, and it's the summer camp experience.
Yeah.
So for those that maybe haven't read the book, you want to talk a little bit, and this is where the idea of community comes in for you. You want to talk a little bit about where that came from for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when I was 16, I became a counselor in training at Sheldon Cavalry Camp. And so what that meant was I spent my summer away, and they gave us, 3 different areas to work. And you worked in the kitchen. I think you worked in the garbage patrol, and then you got to go do electives with the campers. And, you got to teach archery or go run around and play basketball or whatever the thing is, work at the pool. I did that when I was maybe 16, 17, and 18, and ultimately had my own cabin. I had cabin 5. And so there were 9, 11-year-old boys in my cabin. And it kind of went all the way up to maybe 15 or 16-year-olds there. Something dawned on me as I watched the camp director gather us before all the campers were there. And, he shared, hey, listen, we've got policies and procedures, but what I learned was it was just so obvious what we were supposed to do. And we got together, I don't know, there were 50 or 60 of us, and we were all between the ages of 16 and maybe 22. And for some reason, it was crystal clear. we need to love on these kids. We need to keep them safe. We need to keep them healthy. We need to encourage them to have fun and be silly and learn. And although we could have all read the really big policy and procedure book, and I mean, hopefully we did, it was this just innate knowledge of the right thing to do. And so my time at camp was amazing because we took care of the campers. We took care of each other. We celebrated. We knew what the rules were. And it was just something we embodied. And it just came so naturally. Yeah. And so I like to think of that Calvary Camp experience over time, kind of how we grew as a staff, and then try to adopt some of those things in the earliest days of Net Health.
You're talking about work. You're talking about building a company, especially in the healthcare space. How do you pull that simple idea forward at the foundation and into this complex environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with really peeling the onion and asking a series of questions. Why are we doing what we're doing? What happens when what we do goes very well? What's the best thing that can happen by what we do? At Net Health, I remember this notion that, we want to reunite caregivers with their calling. And one of the kernels of knowledge there was that the vast majority of people that get into healthcare, they view it as a calling. I mean, they want to be in the lives of people who need help, and they want to help them. They're just designed that way. That's just kind of their wiring. And what the modern architecture of EMRs and other things, that they had kind of put up a wall in that. And so we like this idea of reuniting them because something was broken, and then making it come full circle. So reuniting caregivers with their calling. It's a simple thing like that, Nathan, where it's just a sentence, but boy, doesn't it explain a lot? Yeah. Doesn't it explain why you're writing the code that you're writing, or why you're traveling to the conference to meet with people, or why you're trying to do the accounting the right way? It speaks volumes. When people do get into healthcare because they care so deeply, but then there is a system, right? There is a system, there's a mechanism, and people can get burnt out in that space. How do you regulate people's energy for that kind of passion, for that kind of individual passion? And how do you help focus it into the larger organizational goal? Yeah, so what I'm hearing from what you're asking is, as organizations, when we feel separated from the mission, how do we kind of bring people back? Yeah. And, that reminds me of the saying, without a vision, the people will perish. And what that actually, the Greek of that phrase really means, without a vision, the people will cast off restraints. And I don't think they mean restraints in a bad way. I think they mean we behave poorly unless we have a vision. It's pretty straightforward. And so this notion that if we can get reoriented to why we're doing what we're doing and figure out how does my small or large piece of the puzzle fit in and actually get us closer. There's such a wave of cynicism in organizations that I talk about that as being an indicator light in your business. Sarcasm and cynicism. And if there's too much of it, it's a warning sign to you. And so if that's happening, people are not connecting the dots of how does my work actually matter? How does it connect to a bigger purpose? Yeah. In your book, you talk about going to coffee. It's just starting as a coffee club, some of this culture work with you, where you just sat and listened to employees and you popcorn questions at them to understand who they are. And I think they felt known to you in a way that was really genuine. So what's the business case for culture? Let's start with what culture is not. Culture is not a foosball table. It's not a kegerator at your office. It's how we make hard decisions. It's whether or not people believe leaders when they're not there. Do they trust them? It's how we set goals. It's how we achieve our goals. That's culture. And so, when I hear the question, what's the business case for culture? I think, what's the business case for air? Whatever culture you have, if you love it and it's working well for you, then that's a great data point. If you think your business needs to change, your culture has to change. There's no such thing as a strategic shift in a business where there's not a culture shift. Yeah. And so really when we think about what are our strategic priorities and how do we want to go to market, and are we going to buy companies? Are we going to build companies? What are we going to do? These are all culture questions. They all come back to how are we going to set and achieve our goals? What are we going to be like together as we make decisions? What's your framework for
for culture, for creating an organizational culture? What's your framework? Do you think about it as something that has to be discovered, shaped, molded? Like what framework do you start with there?
Mm-hmm. At the highest level, it's how we set and achieve goals. And I know that seems really maybe a bit cold and simple, but when we're setting our goals, are we being reasonable? Are we being bold enough? Are we holding back too much? So something as simple as like, how do we have conversations around what the goal should be? And then when we think about achieving it, are we designing the teams in the right way? Are we arming them with what they need? Are we paying them a proper wage? Are we celebrating when we win? When we fail, do we learn from that or do we get angry at each other?
Yeah.
And so it's a really simple way to think about culture, but it tells a whole variety of tales about your business.
How do you think you scale culture when it comes to building that structure and that framework of how you're accomplishing goals and how you're treating each other, I think, when accomplishing those goals? How do you scale that?
Mm-hmm. In my experience, directly with Net Health, there were really 3 phases that I think about. And there was this kind of startup-y phase, which is maybe 0 to 50 employees or so. This is, you're doing what it takes, and everybody is wearing a few hats, and that's okay. And, maybe you can attract the best talent, maybe you can't, but you're making it work. You're really paying attention to what clients need. In the best case, you're not pretending to have it all figured out. I made that mistake so many times as a young leader. And then that next phase, which I think of as really like maybe 50 to 250 or 300 employees, this is where you're professionalizing, and you've got lots of different job titles that you never imagined happened. You are creating scale and policies and procedures that make sense at scale. You're creating weights and measures that should last, whether you're in the room or not.
Yeah.
And decision matrices that should make sense. You're designing culture to really be kind of bulletproof through that phase, because you just always can't be in the room. And I think about that next phase, which is, I guess in our example, maybe 300 to 700-ish employees. And this is having business unit leaders. This is having a bit of a matrixed organization and creating really good systems that should be pressure tested well. And it's a different vibe. It's a different feeling. You've got employees all over the United States at that point, or in this example. And it's definitely a different way to lead. And, plus 1,000, et cetera. I don't know. I don't do that.
Did you ever get it wrong?
I always get it wrong. I still get it wrong a lot now. I think an example maybe we all can relate to is that, the idea of what got you there won't get you to the next phase. And it works in reverse as well. So as an example, large companies typically become afraid and allergic of innovation. And the reason why is that they are, and this is written about in the Innovator's Dilemma, I'm not the first person to talk about this, but when you get to scale, the rewards, the bonuses, the annual plans, they're all built around margin and growth rates, and they're not designed to take huge innovative swings to degrade margin and drop EBITDA by 20 points. And it's just not the way the game kind of works. And so inevitably, they become more allergic to innovation. And so they get forced to buying all their innovation. They wait and kind of see who's growing quickly. They think about building it themselves, but when they run it past the CFO or whoever that cop might be, the business case doesn't really work out. Whether it's private equity or privately owned, it doesn't matter. It's just a normal way to be as you get bigger. Not all companies, but a lot of them. The flip side is young companies sometimes can focus too much on being the next innovative thing and not be mature enough in their scale and scope. And I'd say I've made all those mistakes, and holding on too long to any of those archetypes and character types, I think, is a mistake.
Yeah, it reminds me. Just you talking about that makes the myth of Icarus come to mind, right? Mm-hmm. The flying too high and the flying too low.
Oh yeah,
like finding that space of risk taking and also the reward taking.
It's hard.
Yeah. So you were talking about your framework of scaling culture, that 1 to 50 area, and then beyond that, the other 2 levels. Who's responsible at those different points for building, maintaining, and making sure the culture is right?
I guess in theory, the founder or the CEO ought to have a moral responsibility for kind of setting a tone in the business. But that's not what I've found always happens. I think you can set a table, and in a really good culture, what ends up happening is that all these ambitious people, it doesn't matter where they work in the organization, they want to do the story of good. They want to show you that, we want to do the right thing at the organization and kind of what the organization was designed for. So especially if you have a pretty clear mission about what it looks like to succeed in your organization when things go well, I think you'll be surprised by if you set the right environment, and that means doing all the fundamentals really, really well, and some of the fun stuff as well. I think what ends up happening is that the culture then becomes led by this next generation of people who say, I've seen a good thing, I want it, and I want to carry the torch, so to speak, for the organization. So in that scenario, I think you can learn a lot more as a CEO by seeing what are some of the beautiful things that other people are doing in the business.
Was there a moment for you when you had to sort of let go of it a little bit and let it exist on its own and grow and change?
And then be amazed at what people create and the ideas that they have and the compelling, both like cultural artifacts that are created, but new initiatives. And what's beautiful is that when it shows up in the business outcomes, and it's not just a cool idea for a party or a new way to make people feel included, it's kind of new products, new reports, new ideas, new go-to-market. That's culture.
Yeah. We did work with a construction organization that has grown fairly large. They're around 5,000 employees now, but they started as 20. And they started in one room and no walls and no offices. And so we did our evaluation on the organization, and oddly enough, and I'm not a proponent for open offices or closed offices, but the point in which culture changed in an organization is when the founder put up a wall and no one could see him anymore. And he was removed. So this idea of being closest to the sun, when you can see the behavior, when you can see the person working and their pace of work and how they're working, it sets the tone. Oh yeah. Right. Yep. So there's this idea that you put up a wall because you've got to have different kinds of conversations. You got to either need some privacy or you're growing, right? You've got people you just need different things at sizes of your business. But it was interesting that was the thread for them, where this leader didn't realize that he was creating a disconnect.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And sometimes people do that for what they think is the best intention. Your anxiety is picked up by those around you. And so you might think, hey, listen, I got to hide this. I got to keep it all together. I can't show them, what's going on in my mind or my heart. And the flip side is true. Like, your joy is infectious. Yeah. And so I think being authentically vulnerable about the struggles that you're dealing with as a leader in the organization, I think people appreciate that level of transparency.
That level of vulnerability and authenticity, you talk about it in the book as well, about the idea of being vulnerable, being authentic and vulnerable. I think you quote Brene Brown in the book. That's not common for leaders of large organizations to wear that on their sleeve and to be proud of that. That's usually something, to your point, you hide that a little bit.
It's invisible to a lot of leaders. And there's a really simple kind of 3-stage way I think about this idea. And the first is that whether it's in really large ways or small ways, what we want to do is we want to find ways to be authentically vulnerable. If we do that, it always builds trust. And once we have trust, we can use our risk-taking muscles together. And so I'm going to run through it again. So authentic vulnerability builds trust, and then it creates risk-taking muscles. And I'll give you a couple examples of this. So one example that most companies can't do, but we do at Net Health, is we call them NED Talks, and it's like Net Health Ed. It's our version of TED Talks. But the process of asking people to raise their hand to tell a serious story of some transformation or something powerful in their life doesn't have to relate to the business. To stand up in front of the entire company and tell that story. And we work with them ahead of time. So we ensure that it's what I would call authentic vulnerability. We're not talking about show up and throw up and you overshared and everybody's like, ugh, that was way too much. So figuring out what that authentic vulnerability means. And in this example, it's standing on stage and telling a story that we've listened to and think matters. In every situation, what happens is when you're listening, you lean forward you're looking at that person, they're nervous, maybe their hand's shaking a little bit, and you have this expression of like, we've got your back. Like, it's going to be okay. We've got you. And then you have this risk-taking muscle that is built so that when you see that person over coffee or over Zoom or whatever the thing is, somehow you know that person in a different way than you did before. And now I'm a bit emboldened to take risks with them. And it may seem complicated, but it's like the most essential way that we develop strong networks, strong friendships, strong working relationships. Whether you do that in something as wild as TED Talks at your company, or you do that through a one-on-one conversation where you're talking about a business challenge. And again, you're doing it authentic vulnerability. You're not oversharing. You're not freaking them out about the peril that could occur in the company, but it's appropriate. Or maybe you're telling a personal story. Yeah. It always builds trust, and that trust leads to having risk-taking muscles.
Yeah, there's something we talk about, and that's the idea of the listening, the moment, and you're talking about it so well, seeing someone be nervous, that you're creating a relationship with that person in that moment, and you're creating a safe bond between the two of you because you're witnessing this person be vulnerable and be accessible on a level that's human, that is part of the experience of being here. So when did stories become so important to you? I mean, you're a good storyteller. I always love a good Patrick story. But when did that become a key thing for you?
Yeah, I mean, heading back to the philosophy for a minute, stories are one of the easiest ways to express a philosophy. You know, the idea behind the idea. It's a reason that I love when leaders get off the podium and off the stage and instead put somebody else in the organization up there to celebrate something that's true and beautiful. You know, people get really tired of their leaders always telling them the way they should think and what they should do and how we should do this. And sometimes when you put somebody, a line level person as an example, who did something really great that day, and you put the spotlight on them, that's powerful. And so I think turning the attention a little bit there is the point. And then everybody understands what that person did well. You know, they don't have to think about the leader. I don't know. Do I trust the leader? Are they saying this for this particular reason? But when we celebrate what's good in other people and how they're kind of living out our values, I think stories work.
Do you think there's a common mistake that some leaders make when they are attempting to scale a company with their culture or with their business?
I'd start by saying that, you know, culture programs that seemed to work at a team of 10 or 20 or 50 or 80 frequently will not work at 200 or 300 or 1,000 people. And so being flexible and nimble about how you define that process is pretty good. Greg Larkin, who wrote a book, This Might Get Me Fired, shared a chapter of an upcoming book he's working on. And I like to use it in my work at Carnegie Mellon. And he talks about the 5 kinds of obstructionists in businesses. So I use them as an example of things to avoid or things to be aware of as culture scales. So at the far end, you've got it's really kind of like the CFO type, which are lovely. We need CFOs. CFOs are amazing. And in fact, you know a CFO I'm thinking of who's amazing. Yeah. But if it turns into an archetype of show me the business case, unless there's a perfect business case, we don't want to talk to you about it, it can stifle innovation. Now, the flip side is the innovators need to be able to think in terms of metrics and dollars and things like that. But if an organization leans too heavily towards that, for example, it will stifle their culture and they'll kind of be stuck in a phase. By the same token, early on in a business, there is the traditionalist. And they can say, well, you know what, in my day, this is how we did it. And this is what got us here today. And therefore, this is the right way we should do things. And we know that's not true. Things have to change. And in some organizations, as they get kind of mid-scale, there's this character called the territorialist. And the territorialist has developed a great relationship with this big customer. And don't you dare come near that partner, that customer, unless you run everything by them, because we don't want to mess up, that relationship. And territorialists are all over the place in mid-sized organizations. Yeah. And that's a danger as well. Whereas that may have started with a strength early on in account management, as a customer was growing, it turns into a real weakness over time.
If someone in an organization, let's say it's not the top of the pyramid, let's say it's not the CEO or the highest, most leader in the organization, and somebody wants to evolve, change, or grow the culture, and they're facing resistance. Is there something you recommend them to do to help get some traction and get buy-in from that C-suite if they're not part of that suite?
All great change at organizations is culture change. And so, I don't think anybody ever needs to pitch that, hey, this is a culture idea I've got and I want to share it with you. I think it's, the direction of the organization needs to change. Let's plot out what this behavior is today that's got us to where we are. And let's talk about what these new set of behaviors needs to be to get us to a new place. That's culture. It's just the way that we set goals, we achieve goals, and we behave in between those two things. And so I think it's kind of realigning it, maybe not even using the word culture, and just thinking of it as what's our behavior that got us here? How do we need to change that to get us here? That's culture change.
I love the idea of focusing on the behaviors, right? What got you here and what's going to get you to the next level. It's really great. Does it surprise you how businesses seem to be in a constant state of change nowadays? Like the speed and the pace in which businesses need to change directions and evolve. Does it puzzle you sometimes how the speed of business?
I think it's pretty exhilarating. I mean, it can be exhausting as well, but the pace seems to be quickening. Yeah, so I think it's here, and I think how we adapt to it, the systems that we create, for ourselves to decompress and then compress. I think that becomes the new question. How do we do that well?
Yeah. So one of the things we're always curious about with the speed of business now is managers. Managers are frontline people. Those I like to use a soccer term called the pivot, right? If you know anything about soccer, the face the defense, receive the ball, and you have to pivot under pressure to then go to the offensive end and distribute the ball out. So this idea of a pivot, having to take the leadership's goals and directions and really where the business wants to go, and then how do you tie that to the ground every day? We talk about the clouds and the dirt in this analogy too. Is how do you tie that to the ground every day in a meaningful way to help employees make decisions on a random Tuesday afternoon? And that idea of the manager, we've identified that as a place that needs so much energy and so much focus for leaders and organizations now. So
I think with managers in general, I start from the ground up and I think, are you giving your employees, your teammates, the tools that they need? It really starts with the basics. Like, do we have the right gear? Yeah. Do we have the right gear to do our job? And if you don't, that's a pretty big challenge. Yeah. So I start with the basics around, do we have the right gear? When they do things really well, how do you celebrate them? What are you doing to point out that they did something fantastic? Yeah. So reward systems, compensation systems, and then just like good coaching. And then when we make mistakes, how are we counseling people through the mistake? Are we whacking them over the head with a 2x4? Or is it a coaching moment? Are we failing and learning kind of a thing? So really how managers handle that. And then ultimately that manager is dealing with a lot of input coming from their manager. And they know a lot of things that are coming down the pipe. And so being wise about what to share and when to share. Oversharing is a chronic problem I see with managers where everybody wants to be transparent, and I think that's really important. But if you give people more than they can deal with for their specific role in the moment, what you're really doing is you're trying to buy yourself time as a manager to say, hey, listen, I got big problems, so just leave me alone for a while because I got to deal with them. And what you're really doing is you're pervading fear throughout the organization, and that's not healthy.
So how do you know when you're getting culture right, when it just doesn't look good on paper?
Well, you can fight, you can laugh, you can celebrate, and you can do hard things together.
Very, very well put. Let's talk about celebration for a minute. What's that look like for you inside of an organization with, remote employees, in-person employees? What does celebration mean to you with them?
At the individual level, and I think the book Drive talks about this a little bit, but when you see somebody doing something that's admirable, that's true, that's beautiful, that kind of symbolizes what you think the organization's about, be quick about it. Recognize them. And that could be as simple as a text. You could Slack them. You could make an all-company announcement. Like, it doesn't really matter what the thing is, but be quick about it. And the second is, getting repetitions around pointing to other people doing things well within the organization. Because simultaneously, you're not standing on the pedestal and talking about what's right and the way everybody ought to think. And people get weary of that pretty quickly. But you're putting somebody else there, and you're recognizing that, like, we expect this throughout all levels of the organization. So I think that's important as well. And then more communally, how are we a we? What does it look like? And if you use the example of a family, families come together for the holidays. Families come together for the big moments, graduations, celebrations, weddings. We should do the same as organizations. We don't have to do them exactly. And I think the family analogy falls flat sometimes when we talk about work. But there are some things we can learn from it. And so part of it is, how are we a we? Do we break bread together? Do we celebrate the moments? Do we come together once a year, once a week? What does that look like? And so kind of depending on your geography, the type of organization, if you're not doing something like that with some frequency, you're missing out.
Yeah. Your second point about noticing, it is like a muscle, is to start noticing what's going on around you versus working, right?
Yeah.
You're looking around and noticing, the little small things that people do that should be celebrated. It's a muscle to have to pay attention in that way. Okay, in closing, I'm curious about what you're working on now. I mean, we talked a lot about what you've built. We talked a lot about some of the things you've done in your past, the story to this point. What are you working on now? How are you influencing the world?
Well, as I mentioned, my day job, so to speak, is spending a lot of time with CEOs and boards who are on that journey, from 0 to $1 billion. And sometimes it's roll up your sleeves and get through things, whether they're buying their first company or whether they have some serious hiring or firing issues they got to sort through, or they're being intentional about culture. But that's the day job. So I get to do a lot of this work through that, which is really fun. I've spent some time recently doing more and more of the dinner stories. And this is an idea that was born out of my experience in bringing new teams together. And so the idea is, you've got a group that maybe they work remotely, or maybe you've just hired them and they all need to work together quickly and well. In the early days, it was bringing them together essentially for a meal. And I had to figure out a way for people to get to know each other. And so through some repetitions, I actually designed booklets, and there's a website and everything. And it's this idea that you bring together a group, you do 5 minutes of speed dating or so. There's a couple of rules. You don't talk about what you do for a living. We've got some guardrails there, but you want to try to get to know each other in a really basic and kind of simple way. What were you like as a kid? What were those TV shows you were watching? What was your first album?
Yeah.
Simple things that help us understand each other in a really basic way. And then we kind of move to a dinner table. And after a little while, we start telling the story of each other. And what's interesting in this moment is that you avoid a lot of the reasons people don't like to get together. The extrovert won't shut up. The introvert wants to leave. The humble brags are everywhere. And in this setup, it's different because other people are telling the story of you. And so if they want to kind of censor some of the details where they thought you were a little annoying, they do. But each time I do it, and I do this with groups typically of 8 in different cities, but more and more I'm doing this with employers who say, you know what, take our management team out. Or we've got this new group. I did one recently with a group of 115 people. We did it over lunch, broke up into groups of 7 or 8. And simultaneously did the dinner stories. And it was lunch, of course, but they got to know each other in a slightly different way. So I've got some projects like that I work on that are really fun. I try to incorporate them into some of the work I do, or workshops that I do for organizations. And I'm always looking for ways to help us implement this idea that authentic vulnerability builds trust and it creates risk-taking muscles. And my real aim is I want to help another 100 companies go from 0 to $1 billion. Yeah. There are a lot of companies out there that want to be on that ride and do that. And so sometimes the simplest lessons help us go the furthest.
I'm curious, what do you get out of it? Except the meal.
Oh yeah. I don't know. There's this deep joy that I get when I see a few things happen. One is when I set the table myself, if I'm not doing it with an employer, I deliberately try to set a really unique table where you might have 1 or 2 people that do not have social mobility, and you've got 1 or 2 people that have high power, high influence. You've got a few people at the table that maybe wouldn't normally talk to each other. And, when you put it all together and you add these ingredients, every one I've done, and I've done this now with about 250 people, every one I've done, people can't stop telling the story of good about the stranger that they just met. And so there's something transformative about what happens when we do it. And there's a great joy I get out of it. I don't know. It's fun for me to convene people. It's fun for me to see strangers become friendly, and at least on talking terms when you would think sometimes they wouldn't. And sometimes they turn out to be really good friends.
Yeah.
So there's something transformational about it that I love. And as you can tell, I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah. You're a keynote speaker. You go out to organizations and groups and you speak to them. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that has on you as the speaker to be able to do that? I mean, that's to share your experiences with a room full of people. And that's a unique, special thing to be able to do. So what's that mean for you to do it?
Thank you. I do agree. It's something I take very seriously, to be in that kind of intimate moment of being able to speak to an organization, and that organization being vulnerable about, okay, what's this person going to, talk about? I take that trust very seriously. What I've found is that the simple stories are the most transformational. And I think our story, what I was able to live through with Chris and with Anthony and others, what we took something that was broken and we made it better. And in some ways, that's the story. And so getting, to speak to people and connect with them about that story, and really the 100 other through lines that come through that, I think is the deal. And what I find is that the vast majority of people, they want change. They want a reason. They want a rubric. They want something to point to and say, you know what, I knew I needed to change something. So whether it's personally, professionally, or in their community, they want that change. And so just having that trust and ability, it's been amazing.
Yeah. Patrick, thank you for coming into the office today. It's been a pleasure having you here talking about work. I love hearing new things to dig into later with you when we have more time. But final question for you is, why do you do what you do?
God wired me in a very specific way. I figured out what it was, and I'm on fire for that. And so if I can get more reps with more people, take care of those that I love, and still do this, I'm going to be doing it until I die.
Thank you. I appreciate
My pleasure.
your time. Thank you.